Episode 11 of Failure is Progress. Welcome. I am Coach Frankie Ortega along with Coach Keith Barber. We should have quite a few new subscribers after this past weekend at our Festivus Games presented by Sweet Cups Chef. Thank you to everybody who stopped by our booth, picked up a shirt, maybe a bracelet. We appreciate you supporting us. It really helps motivate us to keep doing these episodes. And again, we just really appreciate seeing everybody. The event was pretty fantastic, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, brother.
There was a great turnout. I think there was something around 60-something teams.
I think it was double that. I think it was like 120 something. I got to double check with Jen, but I'm pretty sure we were up in the 120s.
Wow. Okay, I was off. But yeah, it was a great turnout. It was awesome to see everybody. A lot of competitors were there for the first time, and there was a lot of competitors who were there with a pair for the first time, which was great. You know, growing the sport, bringing new people in, that is fantastic. So thank you guys to everybody who came through and who subscribed. We appreciate it. If you can share this with your friends. Again, we're trying to grow this as much as we can and not only grow our sport, but the camaraderie within it, which is, in our opinion, one of the best parts, right?
Absolutely. Community over everything.
Community over everything. All right, Keith, let's get into episode number 11. Today, what are we talking about?
Today, we're going to be talking about the 9 foundational movements of CrossFit.
This is one of my favorite topics because it was one of the few things that I was able to really get 100% down in the L1. For those of you listening, a lot of this podcast came about because of my nerdy study sessions with Keith. I love picking his brain, and he knows this manual a lot better than I do. And the easiest way for me to learn it is to learn by practice and by researching. And a lot of that research comes from me just talking to Keith and asking him nerdy questions. And we got into this when we were actually just talking about it last week. So we thought it'd be a great episode. So in short, we'll go over those 9 movements that most people may or may not know. The first one is the air squat, followed by the front squat, and then the overhead squat. After that, we have the shoulder press, the push press, and the push jerk. And then we round it off with the deadlift, the sumo deadlift high pull, and the medicine ball clean. The reason why I like these is because they kind of derive from each other, right? The 3 squats, the 3 presses, and then we have the 3 deadlift variations.
Yeah.
I want to start with the last 3, and then we'll work into the other ones, just because we were just talking about how the sumo deadlift high pull was in the Festivus Games competition. It's something that we don't see a lot of. And I think I've heard through speaking with members and also researching online that one of the reasons we don't do the sumo deadlift high pull too much is because there's been a lot of injuries in the past. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but I just wanted your opinion, being that you've been doing this a lot longer. The sumo deadlift high pull, why don't we do that more often?
Yeah, there was a article that came out. I'm not really sure who the publisher was, but the article basically said that the sumo deadlift high pull forces you into an internally rotated position while also elevating your shoulder. Those 2 things at the same time can bring about some injuries to the shoulder, just because it's not a very strong position for your shoulder.
Rotator cuff.
Yeah, rotator cuff, labrum, all of that fun stuff that internally rotates your shoulder, but also the antagonizers that are elevating your shoulders are working against those muscle groups as well. So it puts more strain on those muscles. I understand the hesitation about trying to protect your members, but also it all goes back to coaching. Like 90% of the issues that people have had with CrossFit can be solved with better coaching. Yes, it does internally rotate your shoulder, but if you're elevating your elbows properly and getting into better positions and setting your shoulders back and down, using more of your lats, using more of your mid traps, your rhomboids, all the stuff in the upper back that are relatively weak in most people, you won't have any shoulder problems because you're going to be building up the right areas.
Understood. And, you know, we don't use it a lot, but it is one of the foundational movements. So why would a foundational movement like this be important? Why is it a foundational movement?
So the sumo deadlift high pull is a foundational movement for two reasons. One, the amount of force that you can produce is going to increase the amount of intensity that you have during your workouts over just a regular deadlift. Two, it teaches you the skills part of our. We were actually just talking about this. Our 10 general physical skills. So the final four are what we call our neurological skills. That's our balance, coordination, agility, and accuracy. So that coordination and a little bit of agility is going to play a huge part in the sumo deadlift high pull, making sure that we're transferring force from our legs into our arms to elevate that bar and not just yanking on it with our back and our arms.
Okay.
And then also, I totally forgot my second point. There was something else.
Were you going to talk about how we can translate this sumo deadlift high pull into our regular daily use? Because I'm interested in that too.
So no, I wasn't going to say that, but I was going to say that it transfers over into our other movements that we do in CrossFit. Your sumo deadlift high pull is going to make you better at your cleans, going to make you better at your snatches, going to make you better at your kettlebell swings. That movement transfers over into so many other movements, and it's a very low-ish barrier of entry. So you don't have to be able to lift a ton of weight to be able to focus on the timing of a sumo deadlift high pull.
Okay, cool. And then going back to what I just said before you answered that. So if we were to start implementing this more often, right, what kind of daily tasks would a sumo deadlift high pull translate to?
Not many, honestly, unless you are someone who works like in a warehouse or you are delivering packages or something where you would have to carry a load a certain degree and then have to hoist it up onto a shelf or on the bed of a truck or something like that. You probably don't use it in your daily life extremely often. However, and I love this question because it is something that people say a lot about snatches, and it bugs the absolute living life out of me.
Thanks for keeping it
Because
clean.
yeah, I almost said something else,
Yeah.
but yeah, I had to hold back. No, it really bugs me because the transferability into your life is only one aspect of functional movement that we use. And in our L1 manual, it actually states that for functional movement, nothing is more important than your ability to produce power.
Okay.
That is our number one criteria of functional.
Okay.
Us being able to use these movements in our daily life is just another criteria. But again, in there it says that nothing is more important than your ability to produce power. There's not too many movements that you're going to do where you produce more power than a sumo deadlift high pull.
Interesting. And why? Break that down more for me. I want to know more about this. This is interesting.
So for functional movements, again, functional movements as far as CrossFit is concerned
Right.
are high power output movements. The reason for that is CrossFit is constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity. How do we get high intensity? We produce more power.
Okay. And the sumo deadlift high pull, you're saying out of the 9 allows us to create the most power most efficiently.
Efficiently in the sense that it's going to be the quickest way for you to develop power out of the 9 foundational movements. Absolutely.
So even more than like an air squat?
Absolutely. You probably can do more air squats in, like, let's say we were doing 1 minute max effort air squats as opposed to 1 minute max effort sumo deadlift high pulls. You're probably going to get more air squats. But if we go to our power equation, which is also in our L1 book, we can add more load to the sumo deadlift high pull. And even if you are getting less reps, you're still going to be producing more power. One, it's probably the same range of motion as an air squat.
Okay.
But again, you can add load. So
Right.
adding that load is going to increase the amount of power you need to produce to go through that same range of motion.
I like that. I'm gonna start doing more sumo deadlift high pull.
It's a fantastic movement. like I said, there was some articles that came out that said, "Oh, you're going to blow out your shoulders if you do sumo deadlift high pulls," and that just could not be further from the truth.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, and me and my partner CJ did the movements in the workouts because we competed as well. And one thing that I was adamant about when I told him was, make sure that you're using your legs.
Mm.
Make sure that you get down almost into like a squat
Mm-hmm.
as you're about to do this. And what a lot of people do whenever we do this movement, and we did it recently in one of our classes because we were preparing for the Festivus Games.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people do the sumo deadlift high pull, and they do it almost like a Russian deadlift, right?
Mm-hmm. Romanian
A
deadlift.
Romanian deadlift, right? So yeah, almost like a Romanian deadlift where they were not using their legs at all, just bending over completely and yanking the bar up. And I said, you're gonna hurt your lower back. I was more concerned with hurting my lower back than anything in my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And I also see when people are trying to do the high pull, their elbows come up and back versus straight up. So that's a mobility issue, right? I mean,
It's more than likely a strength issue or a coordination issue. Most people have the ability to keep their elbows above the bar as far as mobility is concerned. Um, some people may not have the strength to go through that range of motion, or to your point, the coordination to drive with their legs, put that energy into the bar, and then just finish with their arms. So
okay.
they're trying to pull the whole way, but eventually your upper body's going to give out, and then you have to compensate in some way, usually by dropping the elbows because you're trying to use more shoulders to get the bar higher.
Okay. And that's where people get hurt.
And that's when people get hurt. Yeah.
Right.
So going back to the 10 general physical skills, if you don't have that coordination piece, you're at more risk of injury when you do that movement.
Right.
When we should have just slowed it down, kept the load light, built up your coordination, your agility, your accuracy, got the skill of the movement, and then added load.
Yeah, and this is one of those movements where, like, for example, a power clean or an overhead squat, I always recommend going into it with a PVC pipe because you really want to work on the technique. This is one of those movements where the PVC pipe is just a little too light for it. So I think a technique bar is better because you really want to be able to develop that balance, and it's hard to get it when there is virtually no weight with the PVC pipe. Do you agree with that?
I agree with it in the sense that it is easier for people to feel the transfer of force.
Okay.
If I'm teaching a brand new beginner that's never even seen this movement, I'll probably start with the PVC pipe just because I'll probably have to fix their setup. I'll probably have to fix their finish position. I'll probably have to slow them way down so that they know to extend their legs before they start pulling with their arms. But once they start getting those, like, for lack of a better phrase, beginner gains underneath their belt, and they're starting to understand the movement a little bit better, yeah it's probably better to integrate a technique bar or even just a bare barbell, just so they can feel the weight and actually feel the drive of their legs starting to elevate that bar, because it is kind of hard to feel with a PVC pipe.
I got you. All right. I think that's enough on the sumo deadlift high pull. I think we should all start implementing it more often. So I might have to start practicing this more. Let's talk about another one that we don't use a whole lot. And I remember this one specifically because it was just before I took my L1. We had our coaches development meeting, and Coach Emily brought it up and showed us how to do it. And I was just like blown away. I had never seen this movement before. And it's the medicine ball clean. The medicine ball clean is one of those that we don't do in workouts. I think we should, but it's a very, I want to say awkward or uncomfortable movement to do. If you haven't done it, you kind of need, I feel like it's better with a heavier ball. And usually we try to go for a lighter med ball, but talk a little bit about that movement and its characteristics and why it's crucial for us as one of the 9 movements.
Yeah. So the medicine ball clean, the reason that most gyms don't do it is because they just see it as useless. They don't see the value in it because they're like, well, if I'm going to program cleans, we have barbells. Why don't we just use barbells?
Okay. And why is it, how do I say, more beneficial or less beneficial to use the medicine ball versus a barbell?
Right. Welcome to my TED Talk. No, no. This can get into a very long-winded answer, but I'll try to keep it as short as I can. The number one reason that I like the medicine ball clean is for the stimulus to fatigue ratio. The stimulus to fatigue ratio is how much work you are going to do compared to how fatiguing that amount of work is going to be. If we can unload your spine by using a medicine ball instead of a barbell, a heavy barbell, what we can do is increase the amount of stimulus and decrease the amount of fatigue per workout. So you can do more work and more frequency. So let's say we were doing a 4-week cycle, and our main goal was to increase our capacity in the barbell cycling of our squat cleans.
Okay.
If you tried to squat clean 3 to 4 times a week and used a moderate to heavy load, you would be crushed by week 2. I mean, just the amount of, like I said, anytime you're loading your spine, you have a ton of systemic fatigue, which is going to be your CNS. It's going to be all the localized fatigue. It's going to be your joints. All of that stuff is going to be inflamed, and you're going to be super, super sore, and it's going to be very difficult to recover from.
I'm
So,
super sore.
yeah, after competing this weekend, I can only imagine. Those were some tough workouts. Like, I know Festivus is like marketed as like the, and I'm going off on a tangent, and I apologize, but I know it's marketed for like beginners, but like those workouts looked rough. That dumbbell snatch and double under one, I was like, whew, that's
The workouts were pretty rough. I am significantly more sore than I was in my last competition, which was in all aspects harder.
Yeah.
But I was not prepared for this one the way that I was for that one, and I'm paying the price for it. But going back to what we're talking about, the cleans. So if I wanted to train and get better for cleans, would you say that it would be more efficient for me, speaking of recovery, to be able to recover quicker and to be able to endure longer sessions with a med ball versus the barbell?
Absolutely. You probably can do more reps unbroken with a medicine ball than you are going to be able to do with a barbell. You're going to be able to keep the same level of intensity and the same level of technique for longer.
Okay.
Usually, once your technique starts to break down, that's what we call junk volume. You're just getting in reps just for the sake of getting in reps. It's really not helping you, your technique anymore, because your technique is starting to break down. You're not really getting the benefits of the capacity, because these are movement patterns that are less efficient. So you just have energy leaks everywhere. So you're not really going to get the capacity benefits, because this isn't really how you're going to do your cleans anyway. You're going to be more stable when you do your cleans. You're going to have more active musculature when you do your cleans. So these cleans that you're doing, they're almost doing more harm than good, because you're closer to injury, and you're not going to get the full benefit of doing that amount of volume.
So why don't we use this more often? We should use this more often, right? I mean, is there a way to use the medicine ball clean in a progression for a barbell clean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I try to do that, especially with the life class. I'll have them do medicine ball cleans instead of barbell cleans. I'll have them do medicine ball thrusters. Trying to think of.
And for those of you who don't know, our life class is our more experienced athlete class. Right?
Yeah. For sure. Definitely our veterans, people who've been around for a while.
All right, cool. So that covers the sumo deadlift, high pull, medicine ball clean. We'll round off those three with the deadlift and just talk about its foundational placement, right? So looking at the foundational movements, it is third from last The deadlift is, I like this one a lot to talk about because I feel like more people get hurt doing deadlifts than any other movement. And it's just because of our ability to, I guess, produce more power. Would that be the right word, power? Or is it just general strength, lifting more weight using that? Um, I personally have been hurt really bad doing deadlifts incorrectly. Um, only actually, I did not get hurt. Let me rephrase that. I got really, really sore and thought I was hurt when in reality what I did was get really, really strong. And then when I recovered 2 weeks later, I was able to deadlift a lot more than I was that day. So going back to the deadlift, why do so many people get hurt with the deadlift?
In my opinion, I don't think people get hurt as often on deadlifts as it's been portrayed through like social media and message boards and things like that. I think that the deadlift for lower back injuries has just been villainized. Anytime anybody has a lower back injury and they also deadlift, they just blame it on the deadlifts. 9 times out of 10, that's not how you hurt your back. Usually, you either your lower back isn't strong enough to do the amount of weight that you are doing, so you're going too heavy too quickly, or you have some mobility restrictions in your upper back and you're compensating by using your lower back. So your lower back is strong enough to do the work, it's not strong enough to do all of the work, and then you run into injuries that way as well. So those are usually two of the reasons that people run into some lower back issues. They're going too heavy, too often, or too quickly before they're ready for those weights. Um, or you just have some type of mobility restriction, which is less likely, but still a very real world possibility that you just have some mobility restrictions and you're compensating by using your lower back.
Yeah, I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy to explain how I feel about the deadlift, right? So I feel like the deadlift is one of those movements that everyone loves because they're able to put more weight on a barbell and lift it without having the proper technique down or without having the proper range of motion to really get the deadlift right. It's similar to playing a guitar. If you've ever played any instrument, or if anyone listening has ever played an instrument, it is a lot easier to play music on a guitar with very little experience knowing and understanding music than it is on any other instrument. You can't like go up to a piano and just start playing a piano by learning 2 or 3 chords versus on a guitar all you need to know is 2 or 3 chords and you can play 90% of the music out there. This is the reason why so many guitarists don't know how to read music. They don't understand music, but they play music, right? I feel like this is the same thing with a deadlift. There's a lot of people who don't lift weights, don't have the proper technique, don't really understand it, but they can just walk up to a barbell and pick it up.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, man, I can lift 200 pounds on a deadlift. Then when their back is sore later on, they don't know why it is. It's because you were lifting more weight than you should have been. So that's how I feel about the deadlift. I think it's easier, like I said, to get hurt because you just underestimate. You underestimate exactly how much your body can or cannot do. Okay, let's go real quick into the squats. I want to get into the air squats. I feel like these are some of your favorite, right? Because if there's one thing Keith loves, it's somebody who can't get full depth squats. But what I like about the air squat, front squat, overhead squat is how they each progress into each other a little bit differently than the deadlift, sumo deadlift, high pull, medicine ball clean. I like how the air squat is essentially the exact same movement across all three of them. The only thing you're doing is progressing your load. Why is it that so many people have a hard time when they first start getting into a full depth squat?
This depends on what demographic you're looking at, because I mean, Ileana and Zoe probably never struggled with doing air squats. But if you're talking about like people, let's say probably most of the people in CrossFit, if I had to guess, are probably anywhere from 25 to 40. So within that 15-year span, at that point, you actually have real bones. And you've probably been, you just got out of college if you're closer to that 25-year-old age. So you've been studying, sitting in a chair on your laptop for the last 4 or 5 years of your life. If you're closer to that 40-year-old age, you've been in the workforce. Probably haven't had the best diet. So you're probably full of inflammation. You have limited range of motion just because you haven't used that range of motion in so long. Your body doesn't recognize it as a strong position. So it's not going to put you in that position.
So, and for those listening, we're referring to Eliana and Zoe, who are two of our kid athletes from the gym who have incredible range of motion. And then you're talking about as we get older. So is it because as we get older, we don't continue to use full depth squats? I mean, when you watch a baby and they're in diapers and they're playing outside, they get into the most beautiful squat you've ever seen, right?
For sure.
Feet are flat on the ground, back is nice and curved in the proper way, right? Nice neutral S curve. And they're full depth. Their hips are below their knees. As we get older, is it because we now start sitting on chairs versus having to squat all the way down? Is it because we spend so much time sitting, like in school, 8 hours a day in a chair, and we're not practicing those squats? Do our muscles lose that elasticity over time?
Not that they lose elasticity, but your muscles can get fixed in a range of motion. What I mean by fixed is they're only strong in the ranges of motion that you put them in the most. We no longer use mobility for survival. So our muscles are only strong in the ranges that we use them. If we're always sitting in a chair where our knees are at a perfect 90-degree angle, our muscles don't need to be stronger in any range of motion other than that until we go to CrossFit and they're like, all right, now squat all the way down. So then that's
So at that point, when we're trying to squat all the way down, why is it that people stop? Is it because they just don't have that strength?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's strength. Part of it's neurological. Like I said before, your brain will not allow you to get into positions that it doesn't think it can get you out of. So you may have the passive range of motion, or what we call flexibility, to get into certain ranges of motion if somebody put you in that range of motion. But you yourself may not be able to put yourself into those range of motion because your brain says, hey, this range of motion isn't safe for us. So your brain will actually physically stop you from getting to a lower depth if your brain doesn't think that it's a safe range of motion.
Yeah. Listen to me, brain. Do what I say. I get that. Yeah, and I see it a lot. Usually I do a lot of our foundations, and whenever we have people who either haven't been involved in athletics in a really long time or are generally new to any sort of exercise, getting into that full depth squat is an excruciating thing to watch.
Yeah.
Really, I do feel generally bad. And I myself have struggled with a full depth squat. Right, I've gotten to it because with a lot of your help, I have pushed myself, but it is a very uncomfortable thing if you have spent the past 20, 25, 30 years of your life just sitting on a couch, just sitting on a chair. Why would you do a full depth squat? In fact, that's why a lot of people do get hurt when they're doing housework, right? Let's say you're putting mulch in your yard or you're moving some concrete blocks. We don't get into a full depth squat to pick it up, right? We just bend over and use our lower backs. And again, we restrict ourselves from being able to use that God-given mobility because we lose it over time.
Yeah, and then that just moves us right into the front squat, because if we don't have that foundational strength in our body weight movements, then it's going to be very hard for us to add load.
Right. And speaking of the front squat, which is one of those movements that I have had a love-hate relationship with, right? Back squats are awesome, right? Why? I don't know, man. The front squat versus the back squat. Why? I kind of want to talk to Glassman himself, the founder of CrossFit, and ask him, why did you choose the front squat over the back squat? Is there a specific reason for that?
Absolutely. It's, well, one, the mobility. 2, 9 times out of 10, if you're carrying something, going back to functional, if you're carrying something out in nature or you have a load on you, 9 times out of 10, it is going to be a front loaded thing. If you're moving boulders, if we're back to Neanderthal times, if you're moving boulders, not too likely you're going to pick it up, put it on your back, and then try to carry it. You're just going to yoke it up. It's going to be
Right.
somewhere around your chest height, and then you're going to try and move it that way. Depending on,
Carrying your children.
yeah,
That's a good point. Carrying boxes, large boxes. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So the front squat, yeah, and the reason why I have a love-hate relationship with it, I do like squatting, but the mobility that it takes to get the barbell and allow it on your shoulder versus carrying it with your wrists is very difficult. A lot of people seem to have a lot of difficulty with the mobility to do that. Um,
or just mobility in general. I think Glassman said that, probably going to misquote him, but he said that he was talking about the immature squat. So basically, when you have a neutral spine and you can keep your knees tracking over your toes and all of that good stuff, but you don't have the ankle flexion to get your knees far enough forward to be able to sink your hips down lower than your knees. That's what we call an immature squat. He said that to go from an immature squat to a mature squat, it would take anywhere from 5 to 7 years of consistent mobility work.
wow.
So mobility takes a long time to get if you're not like hammering it out, 8 hours a day every day, then obviously it's going to take a little bit less time. But if you're doing like 20 to 30 minutes every day, and you still have like some extreme ranges of motion to go through, it's going to take a long time.
Understood, understood. And speaking of mobility, right? Going from a front squat, which is already pretty difficult, getting your elbows high enough to keep that bar on your shoulders, moving to an overhead squat is seemingly even more difficult, right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of core strength involved in there that we kind of could cheat a little bit with in a front squat, right? As long as we can keep our elbows up high enough to hold that bar at the bottom, or even keep ourselves stable enough, our back can kind of keep us in line. But on an overhead squat, there's no cheating, right? You're either going to drop that bar forward or drop that bar back.
Yeah.
Is that a combination of core strength and shoulders, or is it mostly like core? Like, do most people have enough? Let's talk about the PVC pipe, right? Do most people have enough strength to hold that bar overhead with the PVC pipe, and then they just lack the core strength to it?
Um, I would say more stability, not necessarily the strength or the
Okay.
core strength to be able to hold the bar over your head.
Core stability.
Most people have the core strength to be able to hold, if we're just talking about the load itself, to hold that load overhead. Now, how well they can balance that load over their head is where the difficulty is going to come in. For instance, most people don't really have a trouble with getting into a good overhead squat. The average person, I should say, doesn't have trouble getting into an overhead squat with a PVC pipe.
Right.
Then you put a barbell in their hands and it all goes straight to what.
Right.
So, and the only difference is the actual load itself, being able to stabilize something that's heavier in that same position through that range of motion. They're just not stable enough, or they don't have the strength in that range of motion, which is stability, to be able to hit that full depth squat.
Understood. Yeah, the overhead squat is one of those that, again, like, we don't do it a whole lot. We do it more than the sumo deadlift, high pull, and the medicine ball clean. But typically the overhead squat doesn't really come up until we're doing snatches.
Yeah.
We just snatch into the overhead squat, and it is a very, very difficult, technically sound movement.
The snatch or the overhead squat?
Both.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the overhead squat, there's a lot of technical points that go into it, but that's why it's so important. Just like the front squat, it is that bottom position of your more advanced lifts. So the stronger and more stable you can be in those positions, the quality of your movement is going to be overall just way better. And then two, you're going to be safer in those positions. If you just start cleaning and you've never done a front squat before, your chances of getting hurt increase exponentially. Same thing with snatches and overhead squats. We have people doing snatches all the time, but we're not building up their overhead squat. They hurt their shoulder. They say CrossFit sucks. I hate this. You know what I mean? And then CrossFit gets that reputation. And it's just like, no, maybe we need to go back to basic training principles and the foundation of what makes CrossFit.
Right. All right, let's talk about the final three. No,
rant.
That was perfect. Let's talk about the final three. Let's talk about the shoulder press, and push jerk. Shoulder press, is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I just happen to be. It's one of my stronger movements. The shoulder press is a strict movement, right? Unless we're doing the push press, but the shoulder press itself is kind of an everyday movement that we do, right? Picking things up and then lifting them overhead. If you've ever been with your kid to Disney World, you lift them up, put them on your shoulders. That's like every parent has to do that, right?
It's iconic.
Yeah, it's iconic. Grabbing heavy things off a shelf, trying to put things up in your attic. Christmas is on the way, right? When we're trying to put our Christmas decorations up, reaching up high, making sure we're holding decorations while somebody else anchors it down, whatever it may be. This is one of those movements that we use on a daily basis. It seems like a lot of people are weaker in this than you would expect. Is it just because the majority of what we do on a daily basis are lighter weights? Is it something that we just don't train enough?
A bit of both. Saying that we don't train it enough, are you talking in regards of CrossFitters specifically, or you just mean just like people?
Yeah, I think the average person, right? CrossFitters practice this a lot.
Yeah.
But I would say, the average person that would come into a CrossFit gym without previous press experience doesn't have a whole lot of strength, right? It's something that you definitely build. And I think, again, this is just my perspective or opinion, but I think people develop strength in the shoulder press a little bit quicker than they develop in other things. A lot of people can go from, pressing 50 pounds to 100 pounds a lot quicker than they go from not being able to do a pull-up to being able to do a pull-up. And I don't know what is it that we just work it more. Is it that it's easier to do it? It requires less effort on a efficiency standpoint. I don't know if I'm asking the right question, but
yeah.
Why?
As far as like the time it takes to gain one, as opposed to the other, being the pull up and the shoulder press, like doubling your PR, basically going from 50 pounds to 100. Yeah. Couple of things with that. What we're talking about is relative strength as opposed to absolute strength. Relative strength being how much weight you can lift relative to your own body weight. Most of that's going to be our gymnastics movements, just moving our body through space. Relative strength, contrary to popular belief, is actually harder because it's dependent on your own body weight. So the smaller you are as a person, or the larger your strength to weight ratio is, the easier those movements are going to be. Strength to weight ratio is very, very difficult because you have to be small and you also have to be strong. When we're talking about absolute strength, that's just how much weight you can lift. How much you can put on a bar or a kettlebell or some odd object like those Atlas stones or something like that. How much weight can you actually pick up? Now, physics tells us that mass moves mass. Super basic. So in those cases, being heavier is an advantage, as opposed to relative strength, where being heavier is not an advantage, no matter how strong you are. There's plenty of strong men that go to like the world's strongest man competitions that can't do a pull-up.
Right.
They can deadlift 1,000 pounds, but they can't do a pull-up. Well, that's because they weigh 350 pounds.
Right.
And that's a lot of weight to be dragging up on a vertical plane. So
then a pull-up isn't really a good contrast to a press. A better contrast to a pull-up would be a handstand push-up.
Absolutely. If we're comparing like apples to apples, I would say, if you're looking for another pushing movement, I would say your strict handstand push-up is going to be a better metric to your pull-up than going pull-up to press.
So what would be more equivalent to a shoulder press, let's say using your back, would it be like a ring row or
I would say a bent over row,
a
because a
bent
ring
over
row
row?
is still moving your body
Still
through
using body.
space.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's still going to be that relative strength. But if you like have a barbell and you're doing that bent over row, now you're actually moving an external load. And in some cases, being a heavier individual is going to help you because mass moves
Right.
mass. Yeah.
Okay. And then going from the shoulder press to the push press, right? And I think this is for a lot of people a favorite movement just because you can get so efficient with it.
Mm.
What's impressive to me is, a lot of times you can't move the barbell on a shoulder press if it gets too heavy.
Yeah.
And all you do is add that little tiny push,
That
and
little
all of a
dip
sudden you're rocking and
is
rolling.
flying up. You can do 10 reps now.
Yeah, yeah. It's impressive. It's
Yeah.
impressive. But yeah, the push press is definitely fun. I love specifically with our programming, we do, I want to say almost every week, maybe every few weeks, we definitely have a strict press session and then follow that up with push presses in our workout. And I love that because it allows us to build and then add the efficiency afterwards. I think the push press is a fun movement. Again, we talk about this all the time, right? The fun part of CrossFit is moving barbells, and it's one of the easiest and fastest ways to cycle a barbell quickly. Um, the one that I think people struggle with more is the push jerk.
Mhm.
The timing and coordination required to do the push jerk, and I found this in a lot of foundations people struggle with. For whatever reason, getting that push jerk is very difficult. And I credit you with a movement you taught me recently, which I'm I'm going to go out on a limb and say you didn't come up with it, but I learned it from you, where you had the PVC pipe right by your forehead and then did the jerk from that position versus trying to get it from the bottom. So you basically removed the push press out of it
Mm.
and just did the jerk portion. And that's been very helpful for me to help convey it to new athletes. But yeah, the push press, the push jerk, I can see where the push press could be used on a daily basis. It's a little bit more difficult to see where the push jerk would be used like out in the real world. And like I wouldn't lift my kid over my shoulders and then do a jerk to try to get them. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a weird movement. But it is one of the foundational movements, right? So
Mhm.
why is it so crucial?
Going back to what we talked about earlier, definitely produces a ton of power. We're talking about quarter extremity. We're building those neurological skills as far as the 10 general physical skills. I mean, all of that stuff rolled up into a really good way to add another 30% onto your push press and still go overhead and build stability and active stability through your shoulders, provided you have an active shoulder. Um, I mean, yeah, you can't really say enough good stuff about laying a really great foundation for going overhead in a dynamic fashion.
I got
So
you.
if you're going from, let's say, you're using CrossFit as your conditioning, but you're an Olympic weightlifter, excuse me, or better yet, let's use a sport that's not so integrated into CrossFit already. Let's say you're a football player, you're a lineman, and you're using CrossFit as some of your conditioning. That push jerk is almost in some ways your starts right off the line. You know what I mean? You're going to get those hands right up. You're going to tuck that chin in. You're going to be in an overhead archetype position, even though you're not actually pressing literally over your head. You're still going to be in a very similar movement pattern. So it can be very beneficial. I think that's something that people forget too. This is probably going to be another tangent, but CrossFit is a core strength and conditioning program. Core meaning foundational. This is going to help you lay a strong foundation for any other activities that you would like to do. So CrossFit has never claimed to be the end all to be all for activity. This
Right.
is something that you do to help you in other areas of your life. If you're a volleyball player, if you're a mom who has a kid that plays a lot of sports and you got to drive them around everywhere and chase them around and help them with their drills and stuff like that. If you're a single dad of 3 and you just, you need that extra energy
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to be able to keep up with all these kids. Just, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a core strength and conditioning program. And
But you know
that's
what? Now that you mention that, and this is exactly why I like CrossFit, right? I don't really know of any other fitness models, and maybe you do. You have a lot more experience than I do. But in all my years of training, I have been training since I was, I don't know, 15 years old. Most of the training that I ever did was, reading magazine articles or, looking at Arnold videos and just trying to do what those guys did. But this is more of like a an actual like prescription or a curriculum, right? Which is
mhm,
what I personally enjoy about CrossFit so much. It's not just making things up and then because some of them work, we stick with them. There was a lot of research and development to these 9 foundational movements and why we use them. And people have, discussed whether or not some of them work or don't. But for the most part, I don't think there's anybody who has done a CrossFit program or a CrossFit style program, followed these protocols and not seen success in their progress, right?
yeah.
Tons of failure, but all of that failure has become progress for them. So that's again for me. This is what I like about it. There is a handbook. There is a curriculum. By the way, for anyone listening, is available for free on CrossFit's website, which is another thing that has always been pretty incredible about CrossFit. Not only do they have their handbook available online, they also post a workout every single day, and they've been doing that for 20 some odd years.
Yeah, it's been 21 years. Yeah.
And sticking with the constantly varied, they constantly vary the workouts. You can go through and look at those workouts and they're almost always different. The one thing that I do kind of think is a little different is they do a 3-to-1 workout to rest ratio, right? So 3 days workouts followed by 1 day of recovery, and then you do that over and over again. So you look, and I've done this numerous times. I wake up and I'll just look at the CrossFit main site, and it's a recovery day or it's a rest day. But aside from that, I mean, I think it's all pretty solid advice, right? That's what we could call it in and of
Yeah.
itself. It is advice.
Recommendations, advice.
It's not written in stone.
Oh, you
It's
mean the
not.
CrossFit?
Yeah,
That stuff is
CrossFit.
method. I thought you were talking about what we're discussing. No, that is a set in stone methodology for sure.
Right, but the methodology in and of itself is advice, right? It's not like, oh well, if you don't do CrossFit, you can't be fit or you can't be healthy. It is
Mhm.
just, this is what CrossFit, or we'll say Glassman, when he created it, he said, this is, in my opinion, the very best and most efficient way to get fit and to create longevity for yourself.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I mean by methodology is that it is a evidence based method. It's at that point it's no longer an opinion. There is factual evidence. There is data points. There is analysis, like you just mentioned, and you can go back to 2002 when it first started. There are all the workouts that you just mentioned. If you hit the comment section, there are dozens of scores in there that Glassman used to develop this whole program.
Ah, you teach me more every time, man. I love this.
Yeah, it wasn't a thing to where some like really smart dude was like, I think this is how this works. So it was like, no, he did his due diligence and really like grinded it out for years and came up with this thing.
I love it, man. Like, again, I really appreciate how much of this you know. And I think I'm advancing so much faster just from learning from you. And I hope the listeners are too. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. I know it got maybe a little geeky, and there was a few tangents on there, but we forgive you, Keith.
I apologize.
All right, guys, this does it for episode 11. Thank you for listening.
Ooh,
Again, if you
11.
have any comments, we do have an Instagram page. It is not hashtag, it is at Failure is Progress. And you can leave us any comments, send some DMs on there. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you have any recommendations for something you'd like to learn about or something that you would like Keith to break down for you, please let us know, and I will ask him to break it down for us. Again, this is a really fun podcast for us. It's mostly me picking Keith's brain because he is my teacher. I am his learner, and we just want you guys to listen in, and we really hope you're benefiting from it. Any last words, Keith?
Frankie, you add a lot of value to this podcast, bro. You've talked about your experiences, and I think that really connects with our listeners. As much as you keep saying, I do know the technical stuff, but I think sometimes that kind of makes it feel like I'm just a robot giving answers instead of an actual like human being. And you bring that humanity back in to be like, oh, these are real people.
Oh, it's great that we compliment each other. It makes for a good podcast, I hope.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one. Again, if you see us in the gyms and you're enjoying this, let us know. It really fulfills us to bring this product to you and know that you are enjoying it. And one last thing, I just want to give a shout out to Sweat Factory CrossFit. Thank you guys so much for allowing us, Clint Macy, for allowing us to do this and create this forum to basically learn together. So we'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good one.